We're going to get started. Thanks for joining us. We're going to get started in another 60 seconds to 2 minutes here. We just want to give some people time to get in. In the meantime, why don't you go to the Q&A area, get used to using that on the bottom of the Zoom dashboard, and tell us where you're watching from and what your role is at your company. I see a couple familiar names in here. David Hershenson, one of your alumni. What's going on, David?
Man, I love to see that. I mean, I hope he's. Where's the comments? I got to see what my boy Hirsch has to say. Hold on.
Pop into the Q&A tab. He says, "Hey guys." Awesome. Some familiar faces. So we got Toronto in the house, Santa Barbara, Montreal. Lots of sales ops. Ottawa, Vancouver. You guys have a big Canadian following, Topo. A lot of Canadians in here. Oslo.
Oslo? Wow.
Truly international.
You know, Dan, it's primarily Dan. We like to call him basically a global presence when we
international man of mystery.
Yeah, I mean it's been interesting. I'm very regional, Max. I'm on the 101, downtown San Francisco, downtown New York. I don't play outside of those two cities.
Silicon Valley and Silicon Alley. That's all you.
Canada, Oslo, name it.
Dan's bringing the international crowd. All right, Dan, you ready to rock?
Absolutely.
Awesome. So we'll get started here today. Amazing webinar we got for you because we got our friends from TOPO in the house. And we're talking about 5 sales plays to over-deliver quota. We got Craig Rosenberg, co-founder, chief analyst, funnelholic over here joining us. And we have Dan Gottlieb, sales development analyst, who I've had the pleasure of talking to now a few times on behalf of Outreach and Sales Hacker. So Dan, Craig, I'm going to let you guys take this away. This video will be recorded, and you will get the link to it so if you want to share it around afterwards. But Craig, why don't you kick us off?
Yeah, thanks, Max. Before I go, I want to give a quick anecdote that relates to Max. So I'm here today with Dan, as Max mentioned, and he is one of our new analysts here at TOPO. Been here for about 6 months and is a rising force. I'm out here saying, look, this is the next up and comer, and everyone come listen to him. And I think you guys will all see that today. But it's funny, I always have this one person where someone says, who's the, I'm talking to someone, we're talking about business, talking about someone up and coming. I used to talk about Max all the time. I'd go do a breakfast meeting. They say I say, yeah, there's all these amazing young people doing amazing things. Have you, heard about this kid, Max, who basically, I used to call you kid, and that's the point. I don't call you a kid anymore, man. But built Sales Hacker from the ground up in a real sort of guerrilla and grassroots way. And now you're all grown up, man, so I can't call you a kid anymore, but I got Dan here as my next kid, and that's kind of where we're at. So let's get going on this webinar here today, Dan.
Appreciate it. Pass the baton.
Yeah, man, I got the baton pass, and then one day, Dan, I will no longer call you a kid. We'll have to see what happens. I'm going to spend 1 minute just telling you a little bit about TOPO. We're an analyst firm. We study high growth companies across their sales development, marketing, and sales organizations. And what we look for is, what are the strategy, people, process, technology, and tactics that they use to drive their phenomenal growth. And we provide that back to our clients in a series of products. Product number one listed today is our consulting deliverables, which are primarily what we call playbooks. There's also audits of programs that come back with sort of deep findings and recommendations, but the primary product is what we call a playbook, which is a 2 to 3 month engagement where consultants come in and operationalize a particular part of your business, like a sales development playbook or account-based. The second is, call it 65, 70% of our revenue is a membership. You have an annual subscription and you work with the team to get access to our data, access to the analysts, and work with analysts on your key burning issues that you need to solve today. Dan is one of our analysts in the sales development practice. And the final thing, we have events. And, Max and I talk a lot about events, and I've learned a lot from him over time. So it's a big part of our business, and I'll be talking about that in a moment. So Dan, if you go to the next slide. So our clients, everyone asks us, it's top to bottom. I mean, we've got some of the big players in the B2B space, from the HPs, the Googles, Oracles of the world, all the way down to, a Series B type organization. What are the things that make them similar? They're B2B. They want to grow fast, and they want to do it in a world-class way. So the next slide is, it's always hard when you're not controlling the deck, is a big one for us. It's hard to do it with drama when you can't do the slide yourself. I just, we today, before this webinar, announced the TOPO Summit. It's April 17th, 18th. We expect about 2,000 people at Pier 27 in San Francisco. We will have tracks in sales development, sales operations, sales effectiveness, SDR effectiveness, as well as marketing tracks, marketing ops, and account-based. And what I would offer you guys today is, if you'd like to come and you'd like to get a discounted rate, you email me the super secret sales hacker discount, Rosenberg@topohq.com. You have to write something funny in the subject line, or I won't respond. You just send me that funny email and I'll take care of you. Okay. So we look forward to this. This is a big event for us. And, it's grown every year by about 500 people. And frankly, we think it's one of the best events out there on the market today. And we'd love to have everyone on this webinar join us. All right. So let's talk about today's event. So I'm going to talk for 2 minutes to sort of set the table. The way we think about sales is that we are in this phase, sort of what we call phase 2 of the SaaS sales revolution. Now, even if you're not in SaaS, everything that happened in SaaS actually has affected you as a sales organization. I'll talk about that historically. But what we believe today is that the key, right, to designing sales plays and designing the sales process surrounds what we call 3 V's, which is volume, velocity, and value. Now, the volume and velocity means that we want to do this as fast as we possibly can. But what we don't want to do is we don't want to sacrifice value. So how do we go do that? And when the team designs plays, that's the thing they have in mind. Right, a lot of times the first instinct of an old school sales leader like me with gray hair is to add extra steps. And then the first instinct of a young up and comer is less steps. How do we meet in between? Because we got to make sure that we're delivering a valuable experience, but we can do so in the least amount, most efficient amount of steps possible. And how did we get here? Let me tell you what I think. So there was I'll give you guys history, just to prove I'm an old man. So basically before SaaS, when I was a young sales rep, we didn't have, there really wasn't volume and velocity. Everything was about value. Every sales team had this core methodology, and there's a lot of old ones that are still in vogue today. I was trained on something called spin selling, okay? But things out there like Sandler and all these other sales methodologies were popular and used by everyone because it was all about value. But when Salesforce.com hit their phenomenal growth rates, one of the things that happened was everyone was attracted to this idea of inside sales, because the thing that Salesforce.com could say that was new, which was they said, well, look, we can get someone up and running, and they are worth $730K worth of revenue. And so if I add 10 people, I get $7.3 million. And when they were in their phenomenal growth rate, they didn't have to deal with expensive field reps initially. They eventually did. They actually could bring people up through the farm system, put them into the inside sales program, and they could, at scale, right, deliver revenue in a very predictable, very exciting way. Very exciting. And that's when volume and velocity took off. Let me tell you guys something. During this era, as SaaS was exploding, if you went and met with a VC and said you wanted to have field reps, they'd kick you out of the office. Everyone wanted to know what's your inside sales strategy, and it worked phenomenally, right? It wasn't just Salesforce. You saw all these SaaS success stories where speed trumped value creation, and you can see that's where the fact is whether people like to hear it from me or not, I will say it and I will say it again, value dropped. The key was speed. And it makes sense, right? Because SaaS was exploding. It was a new thing. In many ways, it sold itself. The idea of an online demo really replaced this idea of value creation. But here's what's happening now is that if you're in a SaaS market today, I mean, shoot, you got 8 competitors and differentiation is very hard to find, right? And it's not just product, it's content. Think about this. If you go take a webinar your marketing team did, go look at your competitors. They've done it and they will do it. Everything lacks differentiation, all right? So it's hard to squint and find differences between product, difference between marketing, difference between value props, all these things. And so what you're seeing now is this re-rise of value and this meeting in between, which is where value meets volume and velocity, because the only differentiator that you have today is sales. It is how you engage with the prospect. Can you deliver an experience that allows you to build a business case with a buyer to win a deal in a highly competitive, highly undifferentiated market? And we see that in the data. When we ask sales leaders, what's the most important thing today? Value selling. And so the value is meeting volume and velocity. And as we hit this next phase here and we continue to grow, that's basically what we're going to see is finally the merger of both good things. These are both good things. And when we talk about what we want to talk about today, that is the context for how we built everything that we built. So with that, I am going to introduce you to Dan Gottlieb, who will take it from here. I will say one thing about Dan. So I just did this highly conceptual thing. Dan's going to get in the weeds. And I can guarantee you by the end of this webinar, you will have one thing you can go do right away from Dan. So Dan, take it away and show him the world.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Because you're global.
Thanks, Craig. Yeah. I prefer being a man of all seasons, but we can get into that later. So, what Craig said really does bring up an interesting point about how the way that we sell is one of the most important and underutilized methods of differentiating yourself versus your competitors. I think that some of you that are individual contributors on here understand that intuitively, but how do you take this idea and apply it to your whole organization? And the plays that we're going to talk about today are 5 examples of ways that you can marry value and volume and velocity. But before we jump into some of those plays, it's kind of important to level set here that if you really break sales down as a profession into what it is, right? It's a series of meetings. And what we're constantly trying to do is add value in each and every one of those meetings. And as you move through a sales process, there are all these new people that show up. How do I continue to add value to everybody that's involved and build a coherent business case throughout the process? That's what we're going to talk a little bit about today, right? At the beginning of a sales process, what we focus on all the time is just trying to figure out how I'm going to sell to you. And the difference between middling performers and high performers on your standard bell curve is that high performers figure out why you're going to buy from me, right? Why do you need to buy from me as opposed to how I'm going to sell to you? And this is a very different way of thinking about your sales process. And so the plays that we're going to talk about today are about how you can take full advantage of these primary opportunities, those early stage meetings to set the tone that I can build value, and I can do it in a way that isn't just one-off for every single one of my clients, but in a way that I can feel confident repeating for every single one of my discovery calls, every single one of my demos, and every single one of my proposal calls on the other side. And it's key to make sure that you understand that these plays are designed to build on each other over time so that the value that you capture at the early stages or something that you can use at the tail end of your process. So the 5 plays that we're going to review today are the insight discovery method for discovery, the insight disco demo for demos. We're going to talk about the proposal play and how to take what you learned at the beginning of your sales process and use it at the end. And then we're going to talk about 2 more nuanced but exciting basic fundamentals in storytelling and running meetings with a POW. So the 5 topics, right? We're going to talk about providing well-researched insights and discovery calls to build value. Well-researched insights is the key here. How do I build value without making sure I'm interrogating you? Number 2, right? How do I turn the demo from this sort of feature functionality discussion into a highly interactive, insight-laden framework? Number 3, right? One of the more egregious errors that sellers can make is just shipping the proposal over the wall. How do I run a meeting walking you through a proposal in a way that is repeatable, but that guarantees that I put myself in the best position to avoid discounting? Number 4, crafting incredible use case stories. That speaks for itself. We'll jump into more detail later. And number 5 is how do I just control every single meeting that I'm in? So when we talk about discovery, right, I think some of you might be rolling your eyes right now, right? Some of your managers might be rolling your eyes because you've been constantly asking your reps and harping on them to do more discovery. Some of your sellers are kind of rolling your eyes because your managers have been telling you that you need to get better at discovery, yet the way that you do it is not by just interrogating with a list of questions. When we think about discovery, what we're trying to do is not qualify. We're trying to determine how ready are they for a business opportunity, right? Why are they going to buy from me? And so when we think about discovery, when you go into this, what you're looking at here is a framework for how TOPO thinks about discovery. And you can really break the quality of the conversation down into 3 basic levels, right? First level is typically what we think about discovery. Tell me what you're doing today. But the difference between high performers and middling performers is the consistency with which they're able to get to level 2, specifically consequences, and level 3, specifically payoff questions within a sales conversation. When we think about this idea of building value, right? Reps tend to think that there's very one-dimensional ways to build value, right? I need to show you something about our product. I need to tell you something, right, about the product that you don't know, that changes your disposition about our company coming in. But from a more human element, really effective discovery is about making sure you understand what's going on and building value through that conversation. And so there are 2 very specific things that you can do for yourself to make sure that you ask more relevant consequences questions and payoff questions without feeling like you're interrogating your prospects. The first one is to use what we would call insight discovery openers just to start the conversation, right? So when we talk about insight discovery, what we mean is that before you jump right into your list of questions, be more intentional about understanding why you're asking those questions, and start off by providing a relevant or a provocative insight before you provide that questions. Let me give you an example. What you're looking at here is a tool that you can use to differentiate which kind of openers you use. Notice I've got the 3 main persona challenges versus the use cases on the left. And the point here is that I'm preparing my insight in advance to then lead into my discovery question just to start the conversation, right? Here's an example from an analytics company, right? Hey, we help other data scientists at organizations organize and analyze, and they tell us that these are the 3 problems that they're facing, right? And then you list those problems and then pivot to your discovery question. This is a really effective way early in the discovery call to differentiate the way that you do discovery compared to your competitors, because you're focusing on making sure that you understand the relevant problems and you're showing that you already have a certain degree of knowledge, rather than, of course, the generic, tell me about your challenges, right? Same outcome, much more specific approach to starting that conversation. And then once within a conversation, you understand the primary use cases in their terms. Look, let's be real, as a business, you understand already what the primary use cases are that you're trying to help solve for. And so advice number one that I just shared with you is prepare your insight, your discovery openers. But number two is to write out in advance different questions that you can ask based on the levels of discovery for each of those primary use cases. And so if somebody shares with you that use case number two is what's most top of mind based on that discovery opener, make sure you jot down those 3 different topics and the ranks that they had, but then go deep on one of those topics. Using a tool like this helps clear up the cognitive abilities in your head to focus on listening and asking the right follow-up questions, as opposed to what we tend to do today, which is wait for our turn to speak or decide on a question, ignore the next 15, 30 seconds of what they're saying, and then jump into that other follow-up question and change topics. Using these kinds of preparation tools help you stay focused, help you go deeper on a specific topic. You're conveying value by understanding the depth of the problem, and will make your ability to convey value about your company and how you can solve those problems much more relevant, especially when we get to the demo phase, which we'll jump into next. So now you've done a great discovery call. You've had an excellent discovery call. You set up this wonderful demonstration, or in other cases, your SDR sort of skipped the discovery call and sets you up with this situation where the expectation is you need to do a demo. We have a framework called the Insight Disco Demo, the IDD, right? And when we think about volume, velocity, and value, this sales play really represents the intersection of those 3 things. I recently had a client where I was talking to him and I said, hey, tell me about the most valuable content that you provide to your prospects. And he said to me, honestly, it's the demo, because everything that we do, anyone that engages in our sales cycle, it's all to get to this transaction so that they can better understand how this is going to live in their world, right? And that's a really powerful insight. But yet today, the demo tends to be this relatively hard to replicate practice where we've got high performers that are doing excellent demos, but how do we bring a repeatable process to the demo that allows me to tailor it but still be consistent? And so the Insight Disco Demo framework lets us do that. And so it's really quite simple. You break it down into 3 to 5 chapters, and every chapter has 3 very basic elements. Number 1 is I'm going to start with that same relevant or provocative insight, right? Number 2 is I'm going to follow that insight with a couple of questions to go deeper. And then number 3 is I'm going to demo how our solution can help solve that challenge. So let's look at this in a little bit more context. This is an example of a chapter. Notice the top, my chapter headline. A chapter headline can be organized by use case. It can be organized by pain point. It can be organized by persona. It really depends on the nuances of who you're selling to and how you're selling to them. But the chapter headline allows you to focus. Now let's talk about the insight here, right? In a situation where you're doing this sort of insight discovery demo, this is your first call, right? Let's say you didn't get a chance to do a discovery call. The IDD allows you to provide a relevant insight that can be either based on research, it can be based on your point of view. It can also just be based on, if you did do a discovery call, what you learned, right? We learned on our last call that you need to pay careful attention to your scheduling process at the right time, because that has a serious impact on your customer experience. And then the discovery is a way for you to keep them engaged, right? Hey, how are you doing this today? Is that still relevant? It's a way to make sure that they're on point, that you're conveying value and that you're talking about the very exact topics that they want to be talking about. Notice the use case story. We'll talk about that in just a second in our next chapter. And then you get to the solution, right? So if you think about it, you're manufacturing this conversation. Here's an interesting point about our point of view that you may not have considered. Let's have a quick conversation about how that's relevant to you. Here's how my product is relevant to you. Now, the last piece here is arguably one of the most important to make sure you understand when you walk away from this demo is the micro close. What we're trying to avoid here is putting all this effort into a demo and at the very end of a demo going, so what did you think? How was that, right? The micro close is a very specific way of building the business case throughout the entire demo because you're confirming that this conversation that you just had was relevant and you're getting immediate feedback from the prospect on how they believe your demo or the solution to their challenges stacks up to what they're expecting and hoping for. So let's talk a little bit about use case stories. Jumping out to number 3, right? We've gone through discovery, we've gone through the Insight Disco demo, and now we're talking about use case stories. Stories, specifically use case stories, are relevant across the absolute entire span of a sales cycle. Stories are important because they're the most relevant, engaging, and memorable pieces of information that you can share. Stories are the easiest way for you to summarize how you're going to add value and establish credibility because you've already added value to individuals that are just like the person that you're selling to. And so when you tell a story, a use case story, right, how do we do this in a way that is repeatable, that I can do every time as a seller, or that can help my team do every time? And so we break our use case stories down into 4 distinct points. The protagonist, the hero of the story and the company. Not the company, right? The person at the company. Number 2 is the challenges, right? So the person at the company faced these challenges, and then this is the mini story about how those challenges were solved, and here's what the business experienced, but then here's also what that person experienced. And it's super critical to understand that the purpose of a use case story is to tell the story of the person, the hero, and how they experienced personal results. Because when you're selling to a company, you're selling to a person at the company, and you're selling that person's ability to use your tool to solve those challenges. And so to summarize, right, you tell use case stories so that you can help your buyers understand how somebody else has solved this problem in the past and let them try to visualize themselves walking through those shoes. Use case stories can be used to bring somebody new into the equation, right? You have all of a sudden you're halfway through the sales cycle, you're doing a second demo for executive stakeholders because your champion got you to the table. A quick use case story can be an incredibly easy way, an impactful way to get execs up to speed about how they should be thinking about your product. So how do we do it, right? This is a tool that you can use and fill out to do it, to create your own use case stories. So I've got the hero of the story, the company and relevant attributes, and a personal anecdote. And by the way, a personal anecdote can be something that has nothing to do with work. They're climbing Mount Everest next year. They run marathons, right? They're having another kid coming soon. Whatever the deal is, why is the personal anecdote relevant? Because it's memorable, because it means that you're helping a real human being. Those are details that stick out in people's minds. You share up to 3 challenges, right? Try not to make those verbose. And then the solution. The solution isn't just, and then they implemented our product. The solution is the story that goes into it, right? They brought together disparate teams, and through the implementation here, through the implementation of a tool, they were able to better organize, etc. You want to take a step outside of your product and tell the business transformation solution story, and then again, come back to the business payoff and the personal payoff. These Couple pieces of advice when you're putting these together. Write it out one time, right? Say it out loud in your head, and then ask yourself, is this something I would say next to a stranger on an airplane? And if the answer is yes, nice job. And if the answer is no, change it. Make it sound like something you would actually say to somebody, right? And then practice it. Turn to your Q buddy, turn to someone in your open office space and say, can I try this with you? Say it out loud one more time, and then bring it to your call. You want it to feel natural. And if you do this over a period of time, you will build a library of stories that you can immediately pull out in the middle of a conversation. The question I always get here from reps that aren't telling use case stories is, how do I use this? Where do I use this in a conversation? I'll give you a very specific example. If somebody says to you or brings to you a conversation, or they bring to you a challenge that they're working on, right? Rather than jumping right into pitch mode, oh, okay, well, this feature can solve for that challenge. Stop by saying, that challenge reminds me of another client that we've had. And then tell your use case story. And then ask them how that resonates with them. Because their first question is going to be, how? And now you're in a much more value-added position to talk through how you go about solving those challenges. So now we've talked about the insight discovery. We've talked about the insight disco demo. We've talked about use case stories. Now let's talk about what happens when I get to the proposal stage, right? The knife in the knife in the chest, the worst thing that can happen to you is you put all this work into all these meetings with humans where you build value, build a relationship with them, and then just ship your proposal over the wall and hope for the best, right? When you're wondering why they go dark, a lot of the time it's because we don't really understand what's happening on the other side. The distinct proposal meeting is a very specific action that you can take when you're walking through the proposal meeting, and a close plan is a deliverable that you can build and use to guide your conversation in the event of good news. This is critical because all of your work comes down to this proposal meeting, because it's the opportunity that you have to summarize the business case, right? Present the solution, present the commercial, how much money it's going to cost, and then you get to stop, press mute on yourself, and listen for feedback. It is one of the most critical inflection points in a deal cycle. So how does this work? What is the tool? What is a proposal play? How does that actually work? What does that look like? So what you're looking at on the right is a table of what we would suggest is a play, right? A play is a choreographed action that you can repeat over and over again in a sequence. And so when you think about the proposal play, the first thing you want to do, right, is you want to recap the business goals and the challenges. This is the opening monologue of the meeting. And this is you recapping, here's what you want to achieve, here's why you can't achieve it. And now I'm going to tell you how we're going to help you do it. And this is how much it's going to cost. How does that sound to you, Mr. or Mrs. Prospect, right? Recapping the business goals and challenges, it sounds like a no-brainer. Some of you are rolling your eyes, right? Yeah, no, obviously we should be doing that. But the challenge is that why don't we do it? And a lot of the time it's because we're not armed with the expectation that that's how I should open up every single one of these meetings, right? How do I make sure that I leave enough time to talk through pricing and get feedback, et cetera? It's know that, okay, after I show you my business goals and challenges, I'm going to jump right into the solution. And so when you prepare that narrative in this sort of 1, 2, 3, 4 step process, it gives you a level of confidence. It's the act of the preparation that gives you the confidence to actually deliver a monologue like that and get that kind of feedback. And then in the event of good news, right? Let's say they're like, this does look pretty good. You know, that feeling when your face starts to get a little burning, you get the sort of gut stomach of like the emotional, I think I'm going to close this deal, right? That's typically when our blinders can go up. So use a close plan to prevent your blinders from letting you progress this deal forward. So in the event of good news, you want to have a close plan in mind. And a close plan does two things. The first thing it does is it is a summary of the business case, right? The act of putting together your close plan can help you prepare for the proposal. And the reason why this is here is because in every single meeting from the proposal moving on is going to be focused on this close plan. And that means that in every single meeting, front and center is going to be the summary of the business case that you have for that prospect, right? Front and center, a constant reminder of why you're here and why they're talking to you as you go through the deal process. And so that's number one, summary of the business case. Number two is you're mapping out the key milestones. So this literally means these are all the things between right now, you and me having this conversation, and us getting you live, including a transaction, right? What are these step-by-step things that have to happen? And so typically buyers or sellers would say something like, hey, what has to happen? And then they'll have a conversation. A close plan allows you to say, here's what our most successful clients do between now and going live. How does this change for you? And what that allows you to do is have an objective conversation and suss out the roadblocks, potentially suss out, in some cases, just being realistic, the real decision maker or the real decision process. We don't know, right? But this allows you to suss that out in an objective way. And so think about how this would work on a proposal call. We're having a good conversation about the proposal, and we know this is working well. You immediately have this already up in a PowerPoint, et cetera, and Google Slides, and you pivot to your close plan and say, great, I'd love to walk through, right, what has to happen between now and then in order for us to work together. And this lets you focus the conversation, right? You don't need to walk through the project summary again. It's on the document because you're going to be using it, sending it back and forth as part of your communication until you go out and actually get the transaction done. And now I've walked you through, right? I've walked you through the insight discovery. I've walked you through the IDD. We've talked about use case stories. We've talked about the proposal play. And now let's talk about the POW. The POW is something that you can use in every single meeting at work. Heck, it's something you can use outside of work. It is a way to open up every meeting, take control, and make everybody very clear about what it is we're here to achieve today. The POW can be especially helpful as a skill for young sellers to master because it immediately puts them in a situation of thinking through what's the purpose of this call, what do we actually want to accomplish, and what is the outcome, right? So when we think about the purpose, we're talking about the call objective. Hey, the purpose of this discovery call is to better understand the top 2 to 3 priorities that you have that we might be able to solve for. Talk a little bit about what we help you solve for, right? The purpose is making it very clear, why are we having this conversation? The A, the agenda. This is super helpful, especially for early stage buyers, to know why they should be meeting with you and what they're going to be doing on the call. When execs look at their calendar and they're trying to make time for something, one of the first things to go are vendor meetings. And one of the first kinds of vendor meetings to go are the ones without an agenda because they don't remember why they're having that meeting. The last one of the POW, the O, the outcome, is the hardest part of the POW to get right, but it's arguably the most important part to get right because it makes it very clear what you want to get out of the call, and really effective sellers line up their outcomes to be in line with both the exit criteria and their sales stages, but also in a way that respects the time of the buyer, right? So a good outcome allows you to have a very specific action or a decision. So an example of an outcome would be, we are going to decide whether or not we should set up a demo or a discovery call as a next step based on what we find today. That's a great outcome for a discovery call. Couple pieces of advice on the POW. The number one, is before the meeting, share it internally. Make sure everyone understands this is what we're going to be doing today, right? And then number 2, share it with the buyer in advance. Put it in your calendar invites. In fact, when folks work with TOPO and they ask us how they can improve the SDR to AE handoff, we always recommend that the SDR puts a POW in the calendar invite for both the prospect and the seller to see in the handoff. Then number 2, so I share it. You share it internally. You share it with your buyer. Now, how do I deliver it live on the call, right? It's the very first thing you do when you kick off the call. All right, everybody. The purpose of this meeting, right, is to blank. Here's how we're going to do it, and here are the outcomes. And then you confirm that that's okay with everybody, and then you confirm the time of the meeting. So here's an example of a POW and how it might sound, right? The purpose of the meeting is to understand your current environment, objectives, and key challenges to see if we're a good fit to help you. We have a very simple agenda to do that. I'm going to start with some introductions. I've got 4 or 5 questions to learn about how you're doing things today. And of course, I'm going to provide some insight where appropriate about how we can solve for that. And at the end of the call, we're going to decide whether or not we should take the next steps together. And in most cases, that usually means another discovery call with other people or a more tailored demo. How does that sound for you, right? It's professional, it's crisp, it's very clear. And at the end of your call, right, when you've got your prospect talking or you're deep engaged in a conversation, you feel much less awkward seizing the time back, interrupting and saying, guys, this is a great conversation. I don't want to stop it, but I want to be respectful of your time and remember of what the outcome of this call is today. I'd like us to make a decision and talk about those next steps. A POW gives you the license, the upfront contract, depending on what methodology you use to actually go out and do that. And so the 5 key takeaways from today, right? Provide well-researched insights and discovery calls to build value. Deliver a compelling and interactive Insight Disco demo framework in your demos. Avoid discounting by actually presenting your proposals. Build that business case up front. Rehearse that business case up front. Craft incredibly arresting use case stories so that you can build relevance, credibility, catch anyone up at any point in the sales process. And then use the POW to control your meetings. And with that concludes my presenter aspect of this presentation. I'd like to encourage Craig, if you have anything else you want to add to these 5 key takeaways, let us know. Otherwise, let's turn this over to Max.
Yeah, you were on a roll. You could tell that you had the singing and dancing lessons in your past.
Oh yeah,
call you out. That was awesome, man. Really, really well done. So
thank you.
We're going to open it up for Q&A right now. So you have the Q&A tab at the bottom of your Zoom dashboard. I had a couple of thoughts from a technology standpoint. As I was listening here. When you talk about the discovery process, what are your thoughts on the role that chat is playing in the discovery process these days? Seems like there are more and more companies now that are embracing chat. I think a lot of the big players in the space are getting in on it from a technology standpoint. Does that change how you run the discovery process if leads are coming in through chat?
Great question. I don't think so. I think chat is another channel by which we're achieving the exact same objective, which is welcoming an interested prospect into a sales process. Mm-hmm. I think that it's very important to understand how you're using your terms. I think the term qualification and discovery are often used interchangeably, right? Mm-hmm. And so we're seeing chat come in for qualification, and chat is used as qualification. It's just being used as another way to process leads or prospects and enter them into the process. I think that how will it change discovery? I think it's going to let you get to those more surface level. You're going to be able to discover some of those more surface level insights or the current situation insights using our framework here, right? However, in my opinion, all chat is going to do is it's going to provide another compelling way to get prospects into true discovery phone calls where you can get to the heart of the consequence and payoff questions, those level 2, level 3 questions, right? And get a better idea of how to read your prospects. I don't think chat's going to disrupt the phone. I think that the phone is, or web meetings, et cetera, are still going to be the primary channel by which true discovery actually takes place, or face-to-face, of course.
Mm-hmm.
And that chat is just another channel to help facilitate that.
Okay.
Craig, do you have anything else you want to add?
Yeah. So look, Max, I agree with you on chat. Let's just put it in a headline. Chat is blowing up.
Yeah.
And it's actually awesome. Honestly, it's awesome. Like I think about the experience I want when I come to a website. I do want to engage often, right? I mean, people spend all this time on their website. I can't really get to where I want to go. And I do want someone that greets me when I walk into the Apple store. And I do want someone that greets me when I engage with you as an organization. But I think Dan brings up the right point, which is very important. So for us, qualification is, should I work a deal or should I engage? Mm-hmm. Discovery is how you win the deal. Mm-hmm. And so qualification on chat is a beautiful, absolutely beautiful thing. And by the way, you're talking about tech, like being able to route it, then be able to, in that context, it's epic. But Dan's right. I mean, look, if we're going to figure out how to win a deal, that has to be the type of engagement where the sales rep talks for, 20% of the time and actually uses questions and insights and ideas to spur conversation from the prospect or buyer so that we can learn enough so that we can actually win a deal. And when you think about those two things separately, I think that answers your question.
Yeah. Okay, great. So you separate the two things. Qualification is one thing. That's what happens on chat. Discovery, true discovery, is still what happens on the phone. Thanks for the insight there. And we have a question here from the audience. I have a couple questions on my own.
Is it from Canada? Is the question from Canada?
It's got a Montreal potentially sounding name.
Okay, all right. Bring it in. Let's
what are some ways you get access to a decision maker when you have the champion that's a manager level and thinks they can handle everything?
That's a great question. So let's assume this is going to vary segment by segment, industry by industry, right? But this is where you want to use. So there's a couple things that you can do here, right? The painful answer that a lot of reps are kind of afraid of is you can just reach out to the decision maker, and there's a few plays that you can run to do that, right? I know that we're constantly afraid of, am I going to piss off my champion if I do that? And if you understand the business case, you understand the challenge that you're actually trying to solve for, right? It's not crazy to reach out to a decision maker and say, right, hey, I'm working with your team to think about that challenge. Is this something that I'd love to get your point of view on that, right? Here's a few reasons why I want your point of view on that. And then just literally reach out to that person. That's one advice. Another piece of advice I might give you is understanding, okay, great, work with your champion. Is there an event where you and the champion together can convey value, right? So specifically, maybe it's a demo, maybe it's a business case review, right? An opportunity, and that's really when you want to use give gets as a way to get that, right? So I'll give you an example. If you're let's say you're past your sort of preliminary demo stage with your champion and their team, you're at the director level, right? And the director reports up to the VP, and the director's like, look, I got budget season coming up. I'm owning this. I got this, right? And you're saying, okay, great, but I still want to get in front of your boss to make sure that this is actually a challenge that we can solve for here, right? I have seen reps say, look, and rely on the give, get, and good cop, bad cop of their process and say, look, I get that, but I still need us to work together to make that business case. And from my experience working with other clients, I've seen other champions forget and rely too much on their own internal disposition and not push back hard enough. Let me do the tough pushing back and try to build them together as a partner to go deliver that content, right? Those would be two examples. Craig, is there anything else you would add?
By the way, Max, I love when people come to me and say, I need to get to the champion because I need to get to the decision makers. I'm stuck with the champion. And then they say, but I don't want to piss off the champion. It's like, bro, you either want to get to the decision maker or you don't. Because if you're telling me they won't let you get to the decision maker, you've made the decision that you're going to piss them off. You just have to, it's like, come on now, let's step up. But you don't, as Dan said, look, there are plays where you don't have to piss them off. I think the reality of the game today is very important. Is that one, decision makers have allocated power. You have director level people with budgets I've never seen in my lifetime of selling. I've been in the game for 25 years. Honestly, they have the ability to buy things like they've never been able to buy before. And you have to embrace it. And I believe that. I believe that, there's a thing called an entry point, which is your most likely place to enter an organization. And you have to embrace it. You got to live with it. And if it requires bringing in other stakeholders and decision makers, then you should be identifying plays like Dan described that allow you to begin your engagement with your champion and leverage that information in that relationship to provide valuable ideas on how you might deliver a conversation to a decision maker. And you just have to work on those plays. I got to tell you guys one story. My favorite one was an ad tech company. Ad tech is horrible. I think you guys all know trying to sell B2C ad tech is brutal. And so they're a startup trying to get in the game. They were stuck in the lowest of levels in a multi-layered organization. And so they had, and the sales rep said, well, we got to get to the decision maker. We need marketing to help. We need SDRs to call CMOs of freaking Procter and Gamble. This is just not going to happen. And so what they did was they embraced the champion. They created a play, which was a high value thing, which was this offer of there's a new way of measuring ad tech spend. And it's a story. In that story, we have real evidence of the some of the fastest moving ad spenders moving to this new way of measuring. And that offer, and we said we'd love to share with the team. So they get to the champion. The champion would actually say, you know what, we got to share this with the team. They found out that by doing that, the champion was putting them in front of 100 people. The champion was putting them in front of the executive team. But that was a thoughtful play that they inserted into the front end of the sales process. It changed the game for them forever.
Wow. Yeah, I actually, so this was a great presentation actually on your key takeaways, avoiding discounting by presenting proposals instead of sending. As a former sales guy, I always make people send it. I always make people send me before anything because I know exactly what they're trying to do. And I will not, I get actually super pissed off if I'm on a call and they wait for the call to present it. I need to see it before, even decks, anything else. So, but I do pull the same move when I'm selling still. So,
look at you.
Know how it works. Cool. So we are kind of out of time here. I had some other conversations on technology and some other things, but we'll have to get you guys on again to continue that conversation. Again, this is recorded, so you will be sent the recording. You'll find it on saleshacker.com. Craig, Dan, thanks so much for joining us and sharing so much information with us. We will hopefully see you on the next one and see you at the TOPO Summit. I know Outreach will be there. Sales Hacker will be there. Hopefully everybody listening, you can make it over to San Francisco for is this the fourth annual?
Yeah.
Fourth annual TOPO Sales and Marketing Summit. Make it happen. Thanks, guys.
Thanks, Max.